Welcome to the Pot.Live podcast. I'm your host, Lenny G. This podcast is all about connecting the community with the thought leaders of business and entertainment in the cannabis industry. As this industry expands and becomes more and more mainstream, we want to educate and entertain our listeners and become your choice and voice for all things cannabis. Thanks for joining us and enjoy the show. If you are into the recreational side of the cannabis industry, yes, stoners, I'm talking to you, then thepot.com is the online and mobile destination for you. That's right, THEPOT.com, thepot.com. Where else can you find the exclusive pot made of the month? Take a pot quiz and win prizes. Scroll through hilarious memes and jokes and check out the latest podcasts, news, and trends, all while having your own profile and voice in the pot.com forum. Visit thepot.com today and get lit. Welcome to another episode of the Pot.Live podcast. I'm your host, Lenny G, and today our special guest is Mr. Alex Rowland. He is the co-founder and CEO of NewTropic. NewTropic, his vision for that has always been to take cannabis manufacturing to a whole new level, one that's on par with professional food, beverage, and pharmaceutical manufacturing. He's also the founder of Ensemble Brands. He's got a bunch of great things going on. We're going to hear all about it. Alex, welcome to the show.
Buddy, I appreciate it.
Excellent, excellent. So tell us, for people that may not know you, tell us a little bit about a background. Who is Alex? How'd you get into the cannabis industry? Give us a little run up to present day.
Yeah, sure. So actually been mostly focused on tech businesses. I started tech companies as early back as 1995, so mostly internet-focused tech businesses. Everything from enterprise software in the deregulated electric marketplace, all the way to digital media software, all the way up until 2015. I've been mostly involved in top software and technology businesses. I've been looking at cannabis really since, say, 2012 as a pretty interesting space to get into, but it wasn't until 2015 that I went ahead and made the jump. And that was really driven by MRCURSA, frankly, and seeing regulations start to evolve in such a way that you actually had some scaffolding that we could build a business around. So in 2015, decided to make the jump, and I've been working in this space ever since. I'd definitely say the first year I was in the market, I'd had no idea what was going on. It was a pretty chaotic space, and I didn't have a lot of experience other than being a casual consumer. So it was really eye-opening spent about a year driving up and down the state, going to visit different operations, whether it was cultivation, retail, manufacturing, the like, just kind of getting an understanding of what was going on. And that was really what informed my decision to start NewTropic.
Tell us a little bit about NewTropic. I know you're into manufacturing, but we do have a listenership that are a mix of business owners plus just beginners to the industry that are trying to learn each facet of it, or people that want to start their own business. So tell us exactly what cannabis manufacturing is and what NewTropic does.
Sure. So what's really been happening over the last several years is cannabis historically has been a plant that you grow and people trim the flower and then they grind that flower up and smoke it in a bong or in a pipe or in a joint or what have you, right? But what we've seen over the last really decade is an evolution in terms of how people are consuming this plant. And that's for things like extracting the cannabinoids and terpenes to make these shatters and waxes and diamonds and the like, but also more complex consumer products. Now you're starting to see beverages, edibles have long time been a kind of a staple of the marketplace, but some real evolution around what is an edible. And you're starting to see some much more complex things like these sprays, inhalers, all sorts of different executions. And that's a lot of what I figured out as I was doing this initial data gathering exercise back in 2015 and 2016 is how important manufacturing was going to be for the market. It was a very lightly regulated market, to say the least, up until MRCURSA was going to get passed. And what we saw in that was really a movement towards regulating the market more like it was a food product or a drug or any other consumable. And that was really focused on consumer safety. How do you make sure that the product's safe for consumers to ingest and that it's precisely dosed such that they're not having a bad experience with it? And when I looked at the market in California back in 2016, and you looked at the state of the art in terms of manufacturing, it was pretty rudimentary, right? It was mostly people working out of their own personal kitchen, or they had a garage set up, or they had some sort of converted auto mechanic shop or something that they were doing these activities in. And there wasn't really what I consider kind of an FDA compliant facility anywhere in the state. So what NewTropic does is we really provide all of that compliance execution for these products. And it can be as simple as literally packaging flower or grinding that flower up to make pre-rolls, to more complex things like extracting the cannabinoids and terpenes out of the plant, and then taking that's going to be a direct consumable product in the form of a concentrate. Or you're going to further refine that. You're going to make things like vape carts, topicals, tinctures, or ultimately edibles, beverages, and the like. So it's handling all of those activities. We don't grow, we don't retail. What we do is we source that raw material from the farms, we convert it into these different products, we get it to a position that is actually in a consumer-ready form, tested by the state, paletted, and ready to go to the retailers.
Great. So do you do that for your own brands or just for external brands?
So when we first got in the market, we toyed around with the idea of building our own brands and did that for a few months before we realized trying to scale a manufacturing enterprise and build a brand at the same time was going to be enormously challenging, not just from a focus and financial standpoint, but also from a tax standpoint. The way the market's structured is such that the federal government doesn't allow cannabis companies to deduct their SG&A. So all of your sales and marketing costs are not tax deductible from the federal tax perspective. So that creates a very hostile environment to build a brand if you can't deduct those expenses. So we decided to take one path or the other, right? Either build a brand and get out of manufacturing and leave that to other people like ourselves, or go full on to manufacturing, start doing this for other brands. And we obviously picked the latter. So we only service third-party brands. That's relatively unique in the state of California. What you've seen is mostly companies who are brands build their own manufacturing facilities because our type of operation wasn't available to them. And they will manufacture their own products and sell excess processing cycles to third-party brands. But that creates some kind of natural conflicts, right? If you've got your closest competitor manufacturing your brand, obviously there's going to be some problems there. So this model of a pure kind of contract manufacturing model for the cannabis industry is relatively new. There's only really a handful of competitors in the state right now. And I'd say we're one of the largest. So our focus is purely to service third-party brands.
And how have you seen the order flow in 2019 versus this chaos that we're in the middle of in 2020?
So two things I'd say, if anyone's interested in the cannabis space and getting into it, it's enormously time-consuming and expensive. I think it's funny, I always say there's a perception outside the industry that everyone in cannabis must be making a fortune, and the perception of people inside the industry is no one's making any money, right? And the truth is somewhere in between. So I'd say that, we took all the way up until January of this year to get our first facility operational. So you're talking about almost 28 months from the day in which we got it into our building until the day we'd actually start generating revenue out of it. So it's a considerable period of time. But I know broadly speaking in the marketplace, you're still seeing aggressive year-on-year growth. We saw obviously a very big spike in March as a lot of consumers were kind of loading up on product before they understood how the state was going to treat cannabis and whether they would rule it essential or non-essential. So there's a big buildup of people going ahead and buying and stocking up on products. Once the state did rule it was essential, you saw that calm down a little bit, but you're still seeing double-digit year-on-year growth in consumption of cannabis products. And all you're seeing now, I think, is more and more consumers have been shifting their consumption habits towards things like edibles and beverages and vape carts, things that are easier for them to consume, frankly, somewhat in a clandestine fashion at home with kids, versus things like flower, pre-rolls, things that are going to smell and be obvious to the other people that they're living with.
Yeah, you hit on a few things there in the last couple of answers. So one of them is we see a lot of the, big boys or public companies, their earnings reports, revenues growing through the, going through the roof, but the profit is not. And I think you hit on that where there's a stigma out there that either people are making a lot of money or they're not making a lot of money within the industry. And I think you hit on that. And I think a lot of that comes from inability to market their brands. I know you have some background in marketing and brand acceleration. What are your tips or advice or services that you offer for brands coming into the market or that may exist and they can't do the traditional advertising methods to get their brand out there to the consumer?
Yeah, I've got a bunch of thoughts about that because I think we see this done both well and poorly all the time in this market. So, starting a cannabis brand, I think you've got to take that as seriously as you take starting any brand, right? You need to understand who is your target consumer, what's the demographic look like, and how to reach that consumer as effectively as possible. And part of the problem you have in cannabis is a lot of the traditional marketing channels that would be available to someone, things like Facebook and Google, are essentially cut off. So you're stuck with more guerrilla marketing tactics. There is some social media activity you can do, but you've got to be a lot more careful about how you use these platforms to engage with potential consumers, which makes marketing those products much more difficult. So I think it's just getting to understand the very specific types of marketing that are going to be most successful in cannabis. B, you have to really get an understanding of the space. We see a lot of people talk about launching new products. They have some familiarity with cannabis, but they're mostly coming from consumer packaged goods or some other vertical market. And they're treating the cannabis like it's simply a commodity, like it's sugar or something else, caffeine that's going in this product. And I'd say it's really radically different. There's very much a culture around it in this market. And you have to really get on the ground, go out to retailers, talk to customers, and get a sense as to what's going to sell and what's not going to sell. The other thing I'd say is right now, before COVID even occurred, price was a significant gating issue to most people. Part of the problem is that you've got black market products still being sold in the state at kind of a 4-to-1 basis over legal products. So consumers still feel like they've got a choice between buying legal product, illegal product. And legal product, given the taxes and the regulations, is more expensive than illegal. So what you've got is this constant price pressure in the market for people to drive pricing down such that the consumer feels like it's an easier decision for them to make moving from unlicensed to licensed product. So price is a big gating issue. And I think that's only accelerating in this COVID environment. You got more and more people looking at it and saying, well, I'm getting deliveries for my product anyway. What's the difference between getting it from an illicit dealer versus getting it from from Ease or one of these, Cleve or some of these other delivery services. So I think, price is crucial. You got to look at that. And I'd also say that, it doesn't make a lot of sense. A lot of people don't understand this. Like this market, and I alluded to this before, there's something called 280E in the federal tax code, which again does not allow you as a cannabis operator, because you're dealing in a Schedule I substance, to deduct your SG&A. As a brand, can't say this enough, do not become a cannabis company, right? It's a very expensive thing to do. And you all of a sudden, it's more difficult to raise money from investors, and it's much more tax inefficient to be a cannabis company and a brand. So really what you want to do as a brand is set up a nice licensing organization, come up with your formulations, your packaging design, all the things necessary to go ahead and execute, and then engage a very competent contract manufacturer on the ground to do all the compliant execution of that product. Then you can, you're going to save money, hopefully on taxes. You'll see where the IRS falls in this, but you're in a much better position to save money on taxes. And all of that execution, which frankly is very expensive, like I said, it's taken us 2 years to build this facility, a lot of money. All that, you can save that money and direct that more towards building demand velocity at the retail channel than worried about, what kind of machines you're going to buy and what kind of building you're going to purchase.
Yeah, it's so interesting. A lot of the guests I have on, we always get to this topic, and it's just there's no rhyme or reason to the way business is conducted in this industry due to the fact that it's not federally legal, that each state, county, municipality has their own rules around everything from delivery to manufacturing to retailing, advertising, whatever it may be. What is the solution? Is the proper solution for someone that's not super well capitalized to wait until it becomes federally legal and then take their shot? Or is it too late then, because then the big boys and all the money comes in and blows out the little guys?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think the simple fact is waiting until federal descheduling is not going to be a solution. Like you said, not only are the existing operators in the space that have managed to weather this storm and operate in a very uncertain and difficult regulatory environment, these are going to be very sophisticated operators, right? And then you're going to have those competitors along with the Nestle's and the Procter & Gamble's and the Unilevers and all these other guys coming into the marketplace and competing. I can't imagine a harder time to compete in the market than when that's going to occur, because you're also going to have all this money sloshing around. All of a sudden, everyone's going to start jumping into the marketplace at the same time. So getting some sort of strategic differentiator is going to be very, very difficult. So I'd say if you're going to get into cannabis, you should definitely do it now. I'd say that on the one hand, it's an enormously difficult time to get in the space, simply because the general consensus seems to be in the investment community that, cannabis isn't all that, we thought it was cracked up to be. The profits aren't there. It's more difficult than we thought, et cetera, et cetera. But the truth is, I think this looks a lot like every other big multi-billion-dollar industry, like the internet, right? I was around, you saw this big explosion of activity in the late 90s. Everyone thought they're going to make a fortune, and, every single product was going to be delivered, via an online site. And you had by 2000, 2001, reality set in that this transition is going to take a lot longer and be a lot more complicated than people thought. And equity values collapsed, and everyone thought that the internet was bust, right? Well, it just, again, these things take time to develop. So a lot of this initial investor excitement, it was overhyped, but they've got it correct in that this is going to be a market worth tens of billions or even potentially hundreds of billions of dollars globally. There is money to be made in this market, and some very big companies are going to come out of this space. It's just going to take some time. This is not something that's going to happen in the course of a couple of years.
Yeah, I agree. And that's great information there. So tell our listeners, please, where can they find out more about NewTropic if they need manufacturing solutions or any of your other ventures?
Sure, yeah. So NewTropic is at newtropic.com, NEWTROPIC. You can find out all about the business there and reach out via the site. I'm also, as you said, I'm the co-founder of a brand incubator called Ensemble Brands, where we work with brands who have, we think, a very unique opportunity in the marketplace, but are lacking some, operational skill sets, whether it's access to funds, compliant manufacturing, brand supports, packaging design, you name it. There's a bunch of different things you have to be very good at in this space. We'll work with those brands to help them execute, and we'll provide funding for those brands. And that's at ensemblebrands.com.
Great. Excellent. So, Alex, before we let you go, I'd like to finish with this question. Give us something that you're super excited about and super concerned about in the overall cannabis industry right now.
I would say I'm not excited about taxes. That's the thing that concerns me most, is I feel like the way they've set up tax policy is such that essentially consumers are very price driven. And you've got a very large, I think the estimates range from $10 to $15 billion of illicit cannabis sales in the state of California, right? And that's California alone. And people have been doing this for literally decades, buying things this way. And to come in and say, expect consumers to change their behavior to legal products when you're going to essentially double the cost of that legal product, I think is a very difficult thing to do. And I think it dramatically slows the transition. So I think that the way this should be done, and I think there's plenty of states that still need to re-regulate their markets, and plenty of countries. The better way to do this is you can target these types of very high tax rates over time, but you've got to start at essentially zero and let companies transition from the black market into the legal market. Once they're in, you can start to raise the taxes, and consumers will go along for the ride because they've already transitioned to legal compliant product. But setting up that boundary, I think, has made growth slower than it has to be, and made this transition take, really probably a decade or more, as opposed to where I think it could have been done in less than 5 years.
That's great. Yeah, you have to run for politics, but I like the tax plan. Very nice. Very nice.
Start low and go high, right?
Exactly. Well, Alex Rowland, co-founder, CEO of NewTropic and Ensemble Brands, thank you for taking the time today and giving so much value to our listeners.
Glenn, I appreciate it.
All right. We'll see everyone next time on the Pot.Live podcast. Have you visited MJ.com? MJ.com is the online destination where you can find everything you need to know about the emerging legal marijuana industry. Where else can you find the latest original content, news, and trends? Connect to a local doctor to obtain your medical marijuana card, receive exclusive brand savings, and have your favorite product delivered straight to your front door? MJ.com has it all. Go check them out.